Hello. Ấy. Ủa? Sao cái này nó lại không transparent nhỉ? Có gì đó sai đây à? Đúng rồi, mình lấy cái link thôi mà. Đây là YouTube mới sửa cái chat này à? Mía cay ra đấy. À đúng rồi. Hôm nọ mình thấy bên kênh BC Gaming cũng có bị cái tình trạng tương tự, bị màu đen. Rồi, để sau đi. Hiện tại trước mắt thì mình ẩn đi đã. Rồi, hôm nay là ngày 10 tháng 7 2024. Tháng 7, tháng 8, 10 tháng 8. Hôm nay là thứ bảy, buổi sáng, là lúc 9:30. Mình hôm qua thì mình đi làm về. Nhớ đấy gì? Đi làm về cũng mệt, cũng vừa thôi, nhưng mà mình đi ngủ khá sớm. Mình không nhớ chính xác nữa, nhưng mà chắc tầm 9:30 10 giờ gì đấy. Thì trước đấy mình quyết định là nghỉ không livestream hôm qua rồi, bỏ không livestream hôm qua. Mình lên giường mình nằm, may là có đi tắm rồi, nhưng còn rửa mặt và đánh răng là không có luôn. Đấy. Hôm nay thì live ban ngày thì mặt nó đang hơi bị tối, mặc dù mình có bật điện này rồi, hay không bật nó còn tối nữa cơ. Nhưng mà giả dụ như này thì sao? Ngược lại, tại cái ánh sáng bên ngoài nó hơi mạnh ấy. Trong trường hợp mình giảm đi này. Này đi. Vẫn hơi tối nhỉ, vẫn hơi trông hơi tục nhỉ. Thôi, không sao cả. Vấn đề nhỏ, kệ nó đi. Thì cho chút chừng ánh sáng á. Nó không đáng kể lắm, quan trọng nhất là tiếng của mình này ok này. Thì mình đang bật cái quạt, tiếng nó hơi, sau này cảm giác tiếng nó bị pick nhiều nhỉ. Đây mình đang nói như là tiếng nó pick luôn này. Mình check tiếng thế nào. Sang bên này bị tiếng pick thì nó gọi là gì nhỉ? Nhảy đi. Cho chút chừng ánh sáng. Tiếng của mình này ok này. Thì mình đang bật cái quạt, tiếng nó hơi, sau này cảm giác tiếng nó bị pick nhiều nhỉ. Đây mình đang nói như là tiếng nó pick luôn này. Cũng không sao, nhưng mà bọn chim nó hót to quá, nghe là tiếng chim luôn. Thì gì nhỉ, như cái buổi hôm trước ấy, mình xem được 2 tiếng mấy 3 tiếng của bên podcast của Lex rồi. Thì hôm nay mình trong cuối tuần này, hôm nay cụ thể là hôm nay và ngày mai thì mình sẽ cố gắng xem hết khoảng 5 tiếng còn lại. Yep. Nên là bây giờ buổi sáng có thể live 1 tiếng, buổi chiều live 1 tiếng nữa. Rồi 9:30 đến 10:30 11 giờ nấu ăn là vừa. Rồi chuyển screen. Chuyển screen. Mình cho cái OBS sang bên này. Trông nó tối quá nhỉ? Hay là mình đóng cửa mình bật điện ta? Chờ chút, tại nó bị tối quá. Đỡ hơn rồi đúng không? Cho này đi. Buổi chiều thì ánh sáng nó sẽ mịn hơn. Mình vừa mới gội đầu ấy, cho nên là hơi tóc vẫn ướt, nên đang bật quạt để sấy tóc. Hy vọng là nó sẽ không bị vào cái mic quá nhiều. Rồi, xem tiếp. Hôm trước thì xem của ông DJ gì nhỉ? CEO của Neuralink. Thì hôm nay sẽ xem tiếp ông này là ông Head of. Sao có tiếng?
And now, dear friends, I look forward to that exciting future. And now, dear friends, here's Matthew McDougall, the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink. When did you first become fascinated with the human brain?
Since forever.
Chờ chút, tự dưng bị mất phụ đề. Bật mới này. Tắt cái này đi này.
Digital device. And now, dear friends, here's Matthew McDougall, the head neurosurgeon at Neuralink.
Không có phụ đề tiếng Việt luôn. Mời thông cảm đi.
Become fascinated with the human brain?
Since forever. As far back as I can remember, I've been interested in the human brain. I mean, I was, a thoughtful kid and a bit of an outsider. And you sit there thinking about what the most important things in the world are in your little tiny adolescent brain. And the answer that I came to, that I converged on, was that all of the things you can possibly conceive of as things that are important for human beings to care about are literally contained, in the skull. Both the perception of them and their relative values and, the solutions to all our problems and all of our problems are all contained in the skull. And if we knew more about how that worked, how the brain encodes information and generates desires and generates agony and suffering, we could do more about it. You think about all the really great triumphs in human history. You think about all the really horrific tragedies. You think about the Holocaust. You think about any prison full of human stories, and all of those problems boil down to neurochemistry. So if you get a little bit of control over that, boil down to neurochemistry.
Neurochemistry là gì? Hóa học thần kinh.
So if you get a little bit of control over that, you provide people the option to do better. In the way I read history, the way people have dealt with having better tools is that they most often in the end do better, with huge asterisks. But I think it's an interesting, worthy, and noble pursuit to give people more options, more tools.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way to look at human history. You just imagine all these neurobiological mechanisms, Stalin, Hitler, all of these, Genghis Khan, all of them just had like a brain. It's just a bunch of neurons, like a few tens of billions of neurons, gaining a bunch of information over a period of time. They have a set of modules that does language and memory and all that. And from there, in the case of those people, they're able to murder millions of people.
Yeah.
And all that coming from, there's not some glorified notion of a dictator of this enormous mind or something like this. It's just the brain.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that has to do with how well people like that can organize those around them.
Other brains.
Yeah. And so I always find it interesting to look to primatology, look to our closest non-human relatives for clues as to how humans are going to behave and what particular humans are able to achieve. And so you look at chimpanzees and bonobos, and they're similar but different in their social structures particularly. And I went to Emory in Atlanta and studied under Frans de Waal, the great Frans de Waal, who was kind of the leading primatologist who recently died. And his work at looking at chimps through the lens of, how you would watch an episode of Friends and understand the motivations of the characters interacting with each other. He would look at a chimp colony and basically apply that lens. I'm massively oversimplifying it. If you do that, instead of just saying, subject 473, through his feces at subject 471. You talk about them in terms of their human struggles, accord them the dignity of themselves as actors with understandable goals and drives, what they want out of life. And primarily it's, the things we want out of life: food, sex, companionship, power. You can understand chimp and bonobo behavior in the same lights much more easily. And I think doing so gives you the tools you need to reduce human behavior from the kind of false complexity that we layer onto it with language, and look at it in terms of, these humans are looking for companionship, sex, food, power.
Yep, sex, food, power. Power is fame, right? Food, yep, sex, food, power.
And I think that's a pretty powerful tool to have in understanding human behavior.
And I just went to the Amazon jungle for a few weeks, and it's a very visceral reminder that a lot of life on Earth is just trying to get laid.
Yeah.
They're all screaming at each other.
Yeah.
Like I saw a lot of monkeys, and they're just trying to impress each other. Or maybe if there's a battle for power, but a lot of the battle for power has to do with them getting laid.
Right. Breeding rights often go with alpha status. And so if you can get a piece of that, then you're going to do okay.
And we'd like to think that we're somehow fundamentally different, but especially when it comes to primates, we really aren't. We can use fancier poetic language, but maybe some of the underlying drives that motivate us are similar.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And all of that is coming from the brain.
Yeah.
So when did you first start studying the brain as the biological mechanism?
Basically, the moment I got to college, I started looking around for labs that I could do neuroscience work in. I originally approached that from the angle of looking at interactions between the brain and the immune system, which isn't the most obvious place to start. But I had this idea at the time that the contents of your thoughts would have an impact, a direct impact, maybe a powerful one, on non-conscious systems in your body, the systems we think of as, homeostatic, automatic mechanisms, like fighting off a virus, like repairing a wound. And sure enough, there are big crossovers between the two. I mean, it gets to kind of a key point that I think goes under-recognized. One of the things people don't recognize or appreciate about the human brain enough, and that is that it basically controls or has a huge role in almost everything that your body does. Like you try to name an example of something in your body that isn't directly controlled or massively influenced by the brain, and it's pretty hard. I mean, you might say like bone healing or something, but even those systems, the hypothalamus and pituitary, end up playing a role in coordinating the endocrine system that does have a direct influence on, say, the calcium level in your blood that goes to bone healing. So non-obvious connections between those things implicate the brain as really a potent prime mover in all of health.
One of the things I realized in the other direction too, how most of the systems in the body are integrated with the human brain, like they affect the brain also, like the immune system. I think there's just, people who study Alzheimer's and those kinds of things. It's just surprising how much you can understand of that from the immune system, from the other systems that don't obviously seem to have anything to do with sort of the nervous system. They all play together.
Yeah, you could understand how that would be driven by evolution too, just in some simple examples. If you get sick, if you get a communicable disease, you get the flu, it's pretty advantageous for your immune system to tell your brain, hey, now be antisocial for a few days. Don't go be the life of the party tonight. In fact, maybe just cuddle up somewhere warm under a blanket and just stay there for a day or two. And sure enough, that tends to be the behavior that you see both in animals and in humans. If you get sick, elevated levels of interleukins in your blood and TNF-alpha in your blood ask the brain to cut back on social activity and even moving around. You have lower locomotor activity in animals that are infected with viruses.
So from there, the early days in neuroscience to surgery, when did that step happen?
Yeah.
Which is a leap.
It was sort of an evolution of thought. I wanted to study the brain. I started studying the brain in undergrad in this neuroimmunology lab. I, from there, realized at some point that I didn't want to just generate knowledge. I wanted to affect real changes in the actual world, in actual people's lives. And so after having not really thought about going into medical school, I was on a track to go into a PhD program. I said, well, I'd like that option. I'd like to actually potentially help tangible people in front of me. And doing a little digging, found that there exists these MD PhD programs where you can choose not to choose between them and do both. And so I went to USC for medical school and had a joint PhD program with Caltech, where I met, actually chose that program particularly because of a researcher at Caltech named Richard Anderson, who's one of the godfathers of primate neuroscience. It has a macaque lab where Utah rays and other electrodes were being inserted into the brains of monkeys to try to understand how intentions were being encoded in the brain. So, I ended up there with the idea that maybe I would be a neurologist and study the brain on the side, and then discovered that neurology, again, I'm going to make enemies by saying this, but
Yeah.
neurology predominantly and distressingly to me is the practice of diagnosing a thing and then saying, good luck with that. There's not much we can do. And neurosurgery, very differently, it's a powerful lever on taking people that are headed in a bad direction and changing their course, in the sense of brain tumors that are potentially treatable or curable with surgery. Even aneurysms in the brain, blood vessels that are going to rupture, you can save lives, really, is at the end of the day what mattered to me. And so I was at USC, as I mentioned. That happens to be one of the great neurosurgery programs. And so I met these truly epic neurosurgeons, Alex Kalesi and Mike Capuzzo and Steve Giannotta and Marty Weiss, these sort of epic people that were just human beings in front of me. And so it kind of changed my thinking from neurosurgeons are distant gods that live on another planet and occasionally come and visit us, to these are humans that have problems and are people, and there's nothing fundamentally preventing me from being one of them. And so at the last minute in medical school, I changed gears from going into a different specialty and switched into neurosurgery, which cost me a year. I had to do another year of research because I was so far along in the process that to switch into neurosurgery, the deadlines had already passed. So it was a decision that cost time, but absolutely worth it.
What was the hardest part of the training on the neurosurgeon track?
Câu hỏi hay nha, để đi lấy cái cắt móng tay.
Yeah. Two things. I think that, residency in neurosurgery is sort of a competition of pain. I think that residency in neurosurgery is sort of a competition of pain of like how much pain can you eat and smile.
Yeah.
And so there's workout restrictions that are not really, they're viewed at, I think, internally among the residents as weakness. And so most neurosurgery residents try to work as hard as they can. And that, I think, necessarily means working long hours and sometimes over the work hour limits. And, we care about being compliant with whatever regulations are in front of us. But I think more important than that, people want to give their all in becoming a better neurosurgeon because the stakes are so high. And so it's a real fight to get residents to, say, go home at the end of their shift and not stay and do more surgery.
Are you seriously saying like one of the hardest things is literally like forcing them to get sleep and rest and all this kind of stuff?
Historically, that was the case.
Forcing them to get sleep and rest and all this kind of stuff.
Historically, that was the case. I think the next generation, I think the next generation is more compliant and more self-care.
Weaker is what you mean. All right, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I didn't say it.
Now I'm making enemies. No, okay, I get it. Wow, that's fascinating. I'm just kidding.
Compliant and more self-care.
Weaker is what you mean. All right.
Generation is more
Weaker.
Compliant and more
Weaker
self-care.
is what
Weaker, đúng rồi, mình cũng nghe như vậy.
you mean. All right, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I didn't say it.
Now I'm making enemies. No, okay, I get it. Wow, that's fascinating. So what was the second thing?
The personalities, and maybe the two are connected, but
So was it pretty competitive?
it's competitive, and it's also,
Cạnh tranh cả, ghê vậy.
as we touched on earlier, primates like power, and I think neurosurgery has long had this aura of mystique and excellence and whatever about it, and so it's an invitation, I think, for people that are cloaked in that authority. A board certified neurosurgeon is basically a walking fallacious appeal to authority, right? You have license to walk into any room and act like you're, an expert on whatever. And fighting that tendency is not something that most neurosurgeons do well. Humility isn't the forte.
Yeah, one of the
Forte là gì?
Humility isn't the forte.
Sở trường. Khiêm nhường isn't the forte. Forte sở trường. Forte.
Yeah, one of the I have friends who know you, and whenever they speak about you, that yours have the surprising quality for a neurosurgeon of humility, which I think indicates that it's not as common as perhaps in other professions, because there is a kind of gigantic sort of heroic aspect to neurosurgery, and I think it gets to people's head a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that that allows me to play well at an Elon company.
Yes.
Because Elon, one of his strengths, I think, is to just instantly see through fallacy from authority.
Yeah.
So nobody walks in, see through fallacy from
Fallacy, sự ngụy biện from thẩm quyền.
authority.
Yeah.
So nobody walks into a room that he's in and says, well, God damn it, you have to trust me. I'm the guy that built the last, 10 rockets or something. And he says, well, you did it wrong and we can do it better. Or I'm the guy that, kept Ford alive for the last 50 years. You listen to me on how to build cars. And he says, no. And so you don't walk into a room that he's in and say, well, I'm a
Thẩm quyền.
nerd alive for the long and we can do it better. The last, 10 rockets or something. He says, well, you did it wrong and we can do it better. Or I'm the guy that, kept Ford alive for the last 50 years. You listen to me on how to build cars. And he says, no. 50 years. You built the last and says, well, fallacy from authority.
Sự ngụy biện, có nghĩa là mình hiểu đoạn này, có nghĩa là những ai mà có quyền đấy thì mình hay ngụy biện, mình hay cho rằng người ta đều giỏi á, thì Elon rất là giỏi trong việc đấy.
So nobody walks into a room that he's in.
Nobody walks into the room that he in and says.
He says, well, God damn it, you have to trust me. I'm the guy that built the last, 10 rockets or something. And he says, well, you did it wrong and we can do it better. Or I'm the guy that, kept Ford alive for the last 50 years. You listen to me on how to build cars. And he says, no. And so you don't walk into a room that he's in and say, well, I'm a neurosurgeon. Let me tell you how to do it. He's going to say, well, I'm a human being that has a brain. I can think from first principles myself. Thank you very much. And here's how I think it ought to be done. Let's go try it and see who's right. And that's, proven, I think, over and over in his case to be a very powerful approach.
If we just take that tangent, there's a fascinating interdisciplinary team at Neuralink that you get to interact with, including Elon. What do you think is the secret to a successful team? What have you learned from just getting to observe these folks?
Yeah.
World experts in different disciplines work together.
Yeah, there's a sweet spot where people disagree and forcefully speak their mind and passionately defend their position, and yet are still able to accept information from others and change their ideas when they're wrong. And so I like the analogy of sort of how you polish rocks. You put hard things in a hard container and spin it. People bash against each other and out comes a more refined product. And so to make a good team at Neuralink, we've tried to find people that are not afraid to defend their ideas passionately and occasionally strongly disagree with people that they're working with and have the best idea come out on top. It's not an easy balance. Again, to refer back to the primate brain, it's not something that is inherently built into the primate brain to say, I passionately put all my chips on this position and now I'm just going to walk away from it and admit you were right. Mm-hmm. Part of our brains tell us that is a power loss, that is a loss of face, a loss of standing in the community, and now you're a Zeta chump because your idea got trounced. And you just have to, recognize that little voice in the back of your head is maladaptive and it's not helping the team win.
Yeah, you have to have the confidence to be able to walk away from an idea that you hold on to.
Yeah.
And if you do that often enough, you're actually going to become the best in the world at your thing. I mean, that rapid iteration.
Yeah, you'll at least be a member of a winning team.
Ride the wave. And if you
A voice in the back of your head, standing in the community, back away from it, admit you were right, but primate brain to say, I passionately put all my chips on this position, and now I'm just going to walk away from it, admit you were right. You know, part of our brains tell us that that is a power loss, that is a loss of face, a loss of standing in the community, and now you're a Zeta chump because your idea got trounced. And you just have to, you know, recognize that that little voice in the back of your head is maladaptive and it's not helping the team win.
Yeah, you have to have the confidence to be able to walk away from an idea that you held on to.
Yeah.
And if you do that often enough, you're actually going to become the best in the world at your thing. I mean, that rapid iteration.
Yeah, you'll at least be a member of a winning team.
Ride the wave. What did you learn? You mentioned there's a lot of amazing neurosurgeons at USC. What lessons about surgery and life have you learned from those folks?
Yeah, I think working your ass off, working hard while functioning as a member of a team, getting a job done that is incredibly difficult. Working incredibly long hours, being up all night, taking care of someone that you think probably won't survive no matter what you do. Working hard to make people that you passionately dislike look good the next morning. These folks were relentless in their pursuit of excellent neurosurgical technique, decade over decade, and I think we're well recognized for that excellence. So it's especially Marty Weiss, Steve Giannotta, Mike Capuzzo. They made huge contributions not only to surgical technique, but they built training programs that trained dozens or hundreds of amazing neurosurgeons. I was just lucky to kind of be in their wake.
What's that like? You mentioned doing a surgery where the person is likely not to survive. Does that wear on you?
Yeah. It's especially challenging when you, with all respect to our elders, it doesn't hit so much when you're taking care of an 80-year-old and something was going to get them pretty soon anyway. And so you lose a patient like that, and it was part of the natural course of what is expected of them in the coming years, regardless. Taking care of, a father of 2 or 3, 4 young kids, someone in their 30s that didn't have it coming, and they show up in your ER having their first seizure of their life, and lo and behold, they've got a huge malignant, inoperable, or incurable brain tumor. You can only do that, I think, a handful of times before it really starts eating away at your armor. Or a young mother that shows up that has a giant hemorrhage in her brain that she's not going to survive from, and they bring her 4-year-old daughter in to say goodbye one last time before they turn the ventilator off. That the great Henry Marsh is an English neurosurgeon who said it best. I think he says every neurosurgeon carries with them a private graveyard, and I definitely feel that. Especially with young parents, that kills me. They had a lot more to give. The loss of those people specifically has a knock-on effect that's going to make the world worse for people for a long time, and it's just hard to feel powerless in the face of that. And that's where I think you have to be borderline evil to fight against a company like Neuralink, or to constantly be taking pot shots at us, because what we're doing is to try to fix that stuff. We're trying to give people options to reduce suffering. We're trying to take the pain out of life that broken brains brings in. And this is just our little way that we're fighting back against entropy, I guess.
Yeah, that's the amount of suffering that's endured when some of the things that we take for granted that our brain is able to do is taken away is immense. And to be able to restore some of that functionality is a real gift.
Yeah, we're just starting. We're gonna do so much more.
Well, can you take me through the full procedure for implanting,
Mình hãy xem 1 tiếng nữa nhé. Bây giờ là 10 giờ, 11 giờ
say,
Mỹ.
the N1
Sure.
chip in Neuralink?
Yeah, it's a really simple, straightforward procedure. The human part of the surgery that I do is dead simple. It's one of the most basic neurosurgery procedures imaginable, and I think there's evidence that some version of it has been done for thousands of years. There are examples, I think, from ancient Egypt of healed or partially healed trephinations, and from Peru or ancient times in South America, where these proto-surgeons would drill holes in people's skulls, presumably to let out the evil spirits, but maybe to drain blood clots. And there's evidence of bone healing around the edge, meaning the people at least survive some months after a procedure. And so what we're doing is that we are making a cut in the skin on the top of the head over the area of the brain that is the most potent representation of
Potent. Mạnh mẽ.
Potent representation of hand intentions. And so if you are an expert concert pianist, this part of your brain is lighting up the entire time you're playing. We call it the hand knob.
The hand knob.
Yeah.
So it's all the finger movements, all of that is just firing away.
Yep. There's a little squiggle in the cortex right there. One of the folds in the brain is kind of doubly folded right on that spot. So you can look at it on an MRI and say, that's the hand knob. And then you do a functional test in a special kind of MRI called a functional MRI, fMRI. And this part of the brain lights up when people, even quadriplegic people whose brains aren't connected to their finger movements anymore, they imagine finger movements, and this part of the brain still lights up. So we can ID that part of the brain in anyone who's preparing to enter our trial and say, okay, that part of the brain we confirm is your hand intention area. And so I'll make a little cut in the skin. We'll flap the skin open, just like kind of opening the hood of a car, only a lot smaller. Make a perfectly round 1-inch diameter hole in the skull. Remove that bit of skull. Open the lining of the brain, the covering of the brain. It's like a little bag of water that the brain floats in. And then it's
Open the lining of the brain. The covering of the brain, okay.
Lining of the brain, the covering of the brain. It's like a little bag of water that the brain floats in. And then show that part of the brain to our robot. And then this is where the robot shines. It can come in and take these tiny, much smaller than human hair electrodes and precisely insert them into the cortex, into the surface of the brain to a very precise depth in a very precise spot that avoids all the blood vessels that are coating the surface of the brain. And after the robot's done with its part, then, the human comes back in and puts the implant into that hole in the skull and covers it up, screwing it down to the skull and sewing the skin back together. So the whole thing is, a few hours long. It's extremely low risk compared to the average neurosurgery involving the brain that might, say, open up a deep part of the brain or manipulate blood vessels in the brain. This opening on the surface of the brain with only cortical microinsertions carries significantly less risk than a lot of the tumor or aneurysm surgeries that are routinely done. The tumor
of the
or
tumor
aneurysm surgeries that are routinely done.
So cortical microinsertions that are via robot and computer vision are designed to avoid the blood vessels.
Exactly.
So I know you're a bit biased here, but let's compare human and machine.
Sure.
So what are human surgeons able to do well, and what are robot surgeons able to do well?
Human can detect, but
at this stage of our human civilization development.
More precise.
Yeah, that's a good question. Humans are general purpose machines. We're able to adapt to unusual situations. We're able to change the plan on the fly. I remember a surgery that I was doing many years ago down in San Diego, where the plan was to open a small hole behind the ear and go reposition a blood vessel that had come to lay on the facial nerve, the trigeminal nerve, the nerve that goes to the face. When that blood vessel lays on the nerve, it can cause just intolerable, horrific shooting pain that people describe like being zapped with a cattle prod. And so the beautiful, elegant surgery is to go move this blood vessel off the nerve. The surgery team, we went in there and started moving this blood vessel, and then found that there was a giant aneurysm on that blood vessel that was not easily visible vessel, and then found that there was a giant aneurysm on that blood vessel there, and started moving this blood vessel, and then found that there was
chứng phình động mạch.
a giant aneurysm on that blood vessel that was not easily visible on the pre-op scans. And so the plan had to dynamically change, and that the human surgeons had no problem with that. We're trained for all those things. Robots wouldn't do so well in that situation, at least in their current incarnation. Fully robotic surgery, like the electrode insertion portion of the Neuralink surgery, it goes according to a set plan. And so the humans can interrupt the flow and change the plan, but the robot can't really change the plan midway through. It operates according to how it was programmed,
Not
and how
yet.
it was asked to run. It does its job
Soon.
very precisely, but not with a wide degree of latitude in how to react to changing conditions.
So there could be just a very large number of ways that you could be surprised as a surgeon. When you enter a situation, there could be subtle things that you have to dynamically adjust to.
Correct.
And robots are not good at that
Currently.
currently.
I think we are at the dawn of a new era with AI of the parameters for robot responsiveness to be dramatically broadened, right? I mean, you can't look at a self-driving car and say that it's operating under very narrow parameters. If a chicken runs across the road, it wasn't necessarily programmed to deal with that specifically, but a Waymo or a self-driving Tesla would have no problem reacting to that appropriately. And so surgical robots aren't there yet, but give it time.
And then there could be a lot of sort of semi-autonomous possibilities of maybe a robotic surgeon could say this situation is perfectly familiar or the situation is not familiar. And in the not familiar case, a human could take over. But basically be very conservative in saying, okay, this for sure has no issues, no surprises, and then let the humans deal with the surprises with the edge cases, all that.
Yeah.
That's one possibility. So you think eventually you'll be out of the job. Well, you being neurosurgeon, your job being neurosurgeon. Humans, there will not be many neurosurgeons left on this earth.
I'm not worried about my job in the course of my professional life. I think I would tell my kids not necessarily to go in this line of work, depending on how things look in 20 years.
It's so fascinating because if I have a line of work, I would say it's programming. And if you ask me for the last, 20 years, what I would recommend for people, I would tell them, yeah, go. You will always have a job if you're a programmer because there's more and more computers and all this kind of stuff, and it pays well. But then you realize these large language models come along and they're really damn good at generating code.
Yeah.
So it's overnight you could be surprised, wow, what is the contribution of the human really? But then you start to think, okay, it does seem that humans have ability, like you said, to deal with novel situations. And in the case of programming, it's the ability to kind of come up with novel ideas to solve problems. It seems like machines aren't quite yet able to do that. And when the stakes are very high, when it's life critical, as it is in surgery, especially neurosurgery, then it starts, the stakes are very high for a robot to actually replace a human. But it's fascinating that in this case of Neuralink, there's a human-robot collaboration.
Yeah. I do the parts it can't do, and it does the parts I can't do. And we are friends.
I saw that there's a lot of practice going on. So, everything in Neuralink is tested extremely rigorously. But one of the things I saw that there's a proxy on which the surgeries are performed.
Yeah.
So this is both for the robot and for the human, for everybody involved in the entire pipeline.
Yep.
What's that like, practicing the surgery?
It's pretty intense. So there's no analog to this in human surgery. Human surgery is sort of this artisanal craft that's handed down directly from master to pupil over the generations.
Yes.
Literally the way you learn to be a surgeon on humans is by doing surgery on humans. First you watch your professors do a bunch of surgery, and then finally they put the trivial parts of the surgery into your hands, and then the more complex parts. And as your understanding of the point and the purposes of the surgery increases, you get more responsibility in a perfect condition. It doesn't always go well. In Neuralink's case, the approach is a bit different. We, of course, practiced as far as we could on animals. We did hundreds of animal surgeries. And when it came time to do the first human, we had just an amazing team of engineers build incredibly lifelike models. One of the engineers, Fran Romano in particular, built a pulsating brain in a custom 3D printed skull that matches exactly the patient's anatomy, including their face and scalp characteristics. And so when I was able to practice that, I mean, it's as close as it really reasonably should get to being the real thing in all the details, including, having a mannequin body attached to this custom head. And so when we were doing the practice surgeries, we'd wheel that body into the CT scanner and take a mock CT scan and wheel it back in and conduct all the normal safety checks verbally, stop. This patient, we're confirming his identification is mannequin number, blah, blah, blah. And then opening the brain in exactly the right spot using standard operative neuronavigation equipment, standard surgical drills in the same OR that we do all of our practice surgeries in at Neuralink, and having the skull open and have the brain pulse, which adds a degree of difficulty for the robot to, perfectly precisely plan and insert those electrodes to the right depth and location. And so, we kind of broke new ground on how extensively we practiced for this surgery.
So there was a historic moment, a big milestone for Neuralink, in part for humanity, with the first human getting a Neuralink implant.
Mình đang muốn đi ốp mấy quả trứng quá. Đấy, bây giờ là 10 giờ hơn và 12 giờ mình mới ăn cơ. Ốp trứng nhá, chờ khoảng 5 phút đi. I'm coming back soon. I'm here.
in January of this year. Take me through the surgery on Nolan. What did it feel like to be part of this?
Yeah. Well, we're lucky to have just incredible partners at the Barrow Neurologic Institute. They are, I think, the premier neurosurgical hospital in the world. They they made everything as easy as possible for the trial to get going, and helped us immensely with their expertise on how to arrange the details. It was a much more high pressure surgery in some ways. I mean, even though the outcome wasn't particularly in question in terms of our participants' safety, the number of observers,
Right.
the number of people, there was conference rooms full of people watching live streams in the hospital, rooting for this to go perfectly. And that just adds pressure that is not typical for even the most intense production neurosurgery, say removing a tumor or, placing deep brain stimulation electrodes. And it had never been done on a human before. There were unknown unknowns. And so definitely a moderate pucker factor there for the whole team, not knowing if we were going to encounter, say, a degree of brain movement that was unanticipated, or a degree of brain sag that took the brain far away from the skull and made it difficult to insert, or some other unknown problem. Fortunately, everything went well, and that surgery was one of the smoothest outcomes we could have imagined.
Were you nervous? I mean, you're a bit of
Extremely.
a quarterback in the Super Bowl kind of situation.
Extremely nervous. Extremely. I was very pleased when it went well, and when it was over. Looking forward to number 2.
Yeah. Even with all that practice, all of that, just you've never been in a situation that's so high stakes in terms of people watching.
Yeah.
And we should also probably mention, given how the media works, a lot of people, maybe in a dark kind of way, hoping it doesn't go well.
Well, I think wealth is easy to hate, or envy, or whatever. And I think there's a whole industry around driving clicks, and bad news is great for clicks. And so any way to take an event and turn it into bad news is going to be really good for clicks.
It just sucks because I think
Driving clicks.
it puts pressure on people. It discourages people from trying to solve really hard problems, because to solve hard problems, you have to go into the unknown. You have to do things that haven't been done before, and you have to take risks, calculated risks. You have to do all kind of safety precautions, but risks nevertheless. And I just wish there would be more celebration of that, of the risk taking, versus people just waiting on the sidelines, like waiting for failure, and then pointing out the failure. It sucks, but in this case, it's really great that everything went just flawlessly. But it's unnecessary pressure, I would say.
Now that there's a human with literal skin in the game, there's a participant whose well-being rides on this doing well. You have to be a pretty bad person to be rooting for that to go wrong. And so, hopefully people look in the mirror and realize that at some point.
So did you get to actually front row seat, like watch the robot work? Like what, you get to see the whole thing?
Yeah. I mean, because an MD needs to be in charge of all of the medical decision-making throughout the process, I unscrubbed from the surgery after exposing the brain and presenting it to the robot, and placed the targets on the robot software interface that tells the robot where it's going to insert each thread. That was done with my hand on the mouse, for whatever that's worth.
So you were the one placing the targets?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So the robot with the computer vision provides a bunch of candidates, and you kind of finalize the decision.
Right. The software engineers are amazing on this team, and so they actually provided an interface where you can essentially use a lasso tool and select a prime area of brain real estate, and it will automatically avoid the blood vessels in that region and automatically place a bunch of targets. So that allows the human robot operator to select really good areas of brain and make dense applications of targets in those regions, the regions we think are going to have the most high fidelity representations of finger movements and arm movement intentions. Fidelity representations of the most
High fidelity, sự trung thủy.
high fidelity representations of finger movements and arm movement intentions.
I've seen like images of this, and for me with OCD, it's for some reason really pleasant. I think there's a subreddit called Oddly Satisfying.
Yeah, love that subreddit.
It's oddly satisfying to see the different target sites avoiding the blood vessels, and also maximizing like the usefulness of those locations for the signal. It just feels good. It's like
As a person who has a visceral reaction to the brain bleeding, I can tell you
especially
it's extremely satisfying watching the electrodes themselves go into the brain and not cause bleeding.
Yeah. So you said the feeling was of relief when everything went perfectly.
Yeah.
How deep in the brain can you currently go and eventually go? Let's say on the Neuralink side, it seems the deeper you go in the brain, the more challenging it becomes.
Yeah. So talking.
So đi lấy trứng ăn. Yo.
Broadly about neurosurgery, we can get anywhere. It's routine for me to put deep brain stimulating electrodes near the very bottom of the brain, entering from the top and passing about a 2 millimeter wire all the way into the bottom of the brain. And that's not revolutionary. A lot of people do that. And we can do that with very high precision. I use a robot from Globus to do that surgery, several times a month. It's pretty routine.
What are your eyes in that situation? What are you seeing? What kind of technology can you use to visualize where you are, to light your way?
Yeah, so it's a cool process on the software side. You take a preoperative MRI that's extremely high resolution data of the entire brain. You put the patient to sleep, put their head in a frame that holds the skull very rigidly, and then you take a CT scan of their head while they're asleep with that frame on, and then merge the MRI and the CT in software. You have a plan based on the MRI where you can see these nuclei deep in the brain. You can't see them on CT, but if you trust the merging of the two images, then you indirectly know on the CT where that is, and therefore indirectly know where, in reference to the titanium frame screwed to their head, those targets are. And so this is 60s technology to manually compute trajectories given the entry point and target, and dial in some goofy looking titanium actuators with manual actuators with little tick marks on them. The modern version of that is to use a robot, just like a little KUKA arm you might see at building cars at the Tesla factory. This small robot arm can show you the trajectory that you intended from the pre-op MRI and establish a very rigid holder through which you can drill a small hole in the skull and pass a small rigid wire deep into that area of the brain that's hollow, and put your electrode through that hollow wire, and then remove all of that except the electrode. So you end up with the electrode very, very precisely placed far from the skull surface. Now that's standard technology that's already been out in the world for a while. Neuralink right now is focused entirely on cortical targets, surface targets, because there's no trivial way to get, say, hundreds of wires deep inside the brain without doing a lot of damage. So your question, what do you see? Well, I see an MRI on a screen. I can't see everything that DBS electrode is passing through on its way to that deep target. And so it's accepted with this approach that there's going to be about 1 in 100 patients who have a bleed somewhere in the brain as a result of passing that wire blindly into the deep part of the brain. That's not an acceptable safety profile for Neuralink. We start from the position that we want this to be dramatically, maybe 2 or 3 orders of magnitude safer than that. Safe enough, really, that you or I, without a profound medical problem, might on our lunch break someday say, yeah, sure, I'll get that. I've been meaning to upgrade to the latest version. And so the safety constraints given that are high. And so we haven't settled on a final solution for arbitrarily approaching deep targets in the brain.
It's interesting because you have to avoid blood vessels somehow. You have to, maybe there's creative ways of doing the same thing, like mapping out high resolution geometry of blood vessels, and then you can go in blind. But how do you map out that in a way that's super stable? There's a lot of interesting challenges there, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot to do on the surface. Luckily.
Exactly. So we've got vision on the surface. We actually have made a huge amount of progress sewing electrodes into the spinal cord as a potential workaround for a spinal cord injury that would allow a brain-mounted implant to translate motor intentions to a spine-mounted implant that can affect muscle contractions in previously paralyzed arms and legs.
That's just incredible. So like the effort there is
Này
to try
hơi
to
bị
bring-
hơi nhanh.
Brain-mounted potential. We exactly. So we've got vision on the surface. We actually have made a huge amount of progress sewing electrodes into the spinal cord as a potential workaround for a spinal cord injury that would allow a brain-mounted implant
Brain mounted implant.
to translate motor intentions to a spine-mounted implant that can affect muscle contractions in previously paralyzed arms and legs.
That's just incredible. So like the effort there is to try to bridge the brain to the spinal cord to the peripheral nervous system. So how hard is that to do?
We have that working in very crude forms in animals.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we've done
So
it.
similar to like with Nolan, where he's able to digitally move the cursor. Here you're doing the same kind of communication, but with the actual effectors that you have.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So we have anesthetized animals doing grasp and moving their legs in a sort of walking pattern. Again, early days, but the future is bright for this kind of thing, and people with paralysis should look forward to that bright future. They're going to have options.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of intermediate or extra options where you take like an Optimus robot, like the arm, and to be able to control the arm,
Yeah.
the fingers and hands of the arm
Sure.
as a prosthetic. For example,
Exoskeletons
PDs.
are getting better too.
Exoskeletons. Yeah, so that goes hand in hand. Although I didn't quite understand until thinking about it deeply and doing more research about Neuralink, how much you can do on the digital side. So there's digital telepathy.
Yeah.
I didn't quite understand that you can really map the intention, as you described in the hand knob area, that you can map the intention. Just imagine it, think about it. That intention can be mapped to actual action in the digital world.
Right.
And now more and more, so much can be done in the digital world that it can reconnect you to the outside world. It can allow you to have freedom, have independence if you're a quadriplegic.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Like, you can go really far with that.
Yeah. Our first participant he's incredible. He's breaking world records left and right.
And he's having fun with it. It's great. Just going back to the surgery, your whole journey. You mentioned to me offline you have surgery on Monday. So you're like, you're doing surgery all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe the ridiculous question, what does it take to get good at surgery?
Practice, repetitions. You just, same with anything else. There's a million ways of people saying the same thing and selling books saying it, but you call it 10,000 hours, you call it, spend some chunk of your life, some percentage of your life focusing on this, obsessing about getting better at it. Repetitions, humility, recognizing that you aren't perfect at any stage along the way, recognizing you've got improvements to make in your technique, being open to feedback and coaching from people with a different perspective on how to do it. And then just the constant will to do better. That fortunately, if you're not a sociopath, I think your patients bring that with them to the office visits every day. They, force you to want to do better all the time.
Yeah, just step up. I mean, it's a real human being that you can help.
Yeah.
So every surgery, even if it's the same exact surgery, is there a lot of variability between that surgery and a different person?
Yeah, a fair bit. I mean, a good example for us is the angle of the skull relative to the normal plane of the body axis of the skull over hand knob is pretty wide variation. I mean, some people have really flat skulls and some people have really steeply angled skulls over that area. And that has, consequences for how their head can be fixed in sort of the frame that we use, and how the robot has to approach the skull. And people's bodies are built as differently as the people you see walking down the street. As much variability in body shape and size as you see there, we see in brain anatomy and skull anatomy. There are some people who we've had to kind of exclude from our trial for having skulls that are too thick or too thin, or scalp that's too thick or too thin. I think we have like the middle 97% or so of people, but you can't account for all human anatomy variability.
How much like mushiness and messes there. Because taking biology classes, the diagrams are always really clean and crisp. Neuroscience, the pictures of neurons are always really nice and very. But whenever I look at pictures of like real brains, they're all, I don't know what is going on.
Yeah.
So how much are biological systems in reality? Like, how hard is it to figure out what's going on?
Not too bad. Once you really get used to this, that's where experience and skill and education really come into play. If you stare at 1,000 brains, it becomes easier to kind of mentally peel back say, for instance, blood vessels that are obscuring the sulci and gyri, kind of the wrinkle pattern of the surface of the brain. Occasionally, when you're first starting to do this and you open the skull, it doesn't match what you thought you were going to see based on the MRI. And with more experience, you learn to kind of peel back that layer of blood vessels and see the underlying pattern of wrinkles in the brain and use that as a landmark for where you are.
The wrinkles are a landmark? So like...
Yeah. So I was describing hand knob earlier. That's a pattern of the wrinkles in the brain. It's sort of this sort of Greek letter omega shaped area of the brain.
So you could recognize the hand knob area, like if I show you 1,000 brains and give you like 1 minute with each, you'd be like, yep, that's that.
Sure.
So there is some uniqueness to the hand knob area.
Omega shaped pattern of the wrinkles in the brain. It's sort of this sort of Greek letter omega shaped area of the brain.
So you could recognize the hand knob area, like if I show you 1,000 brains and give you like 1 minute with each, you'd be like, yep, that's that.
Sure.
And so there is some uniqueness to that area of the brain, like in terms of the geometry, the topology of the thing.
Yeah.
Where is it about in the...
So you have this strip of brain running down the top called the primary motor area. And I'm sure you've seen this picture of the homunculus laid over the surface of the brain.
Uầy, hình cái đỉnh ấy. Ở trên đỉnh đầu là tay chân này. Quá hình cái đỉnh thật. Xong rồi facelift. Răng. Răng một bên. Ủa? Bên phải này có lưỡi này. À đâu? Cái này không phải lưỡi. Gum. Lip. Bên này cũng có lip này. Jaw. Bên này thì là jaw. Bên này là teeth. Nose. Nó đỉnh nhờ. Chụp hình cái đỉnh vãi. Làm gì có não phải, não trái gì cả. Toes. Chân phải, knee. Hand, arm, thumb. Forearm. Knee ở chân thì là mỗi bên một cái. Hip. Cái là trunk, shoulder, head.
Weird little guy with huge lips and giant hands. That guy sort of lays with his legs up at the top of the brain and face, arm areas farther down, and then some kind of mouth, lip, tongue areas farther down. And so the hand is right in there, and then the areas that control speech, at least on the left side of the brain, in most people are just below that. And so any muscle that you voluntarily move in your body, the vast majority of that references that strip, or those intentions come from that strip of brain, and the wrinkle for hand knob is right in the middle of that.
And vision is back here.
Yep.
Also close to the surface.
Vision's a little deeper, and so this gets to your question about how deep can you get. To do vision, we can't just do the surface of the brain. We have to be able to go in, not as deep as we'd have to go for DBS, but maybe a centimeter deeper than we're used to for hand insertions. And so that's, work in progress. That's a new set of challenges to overcome.
By the way, you mentioned the Utah array, and I just saw a picture of that, and that thing looks terrifying. Because it's because it's rigid, and then if you look at the threads, they're flexible. What can you say that's interesting to you about that kind of approach of the flexible threads to deliver the electrodes next to the neurons?
Yeah, I mean, the goal there comes from experience. I mean, we stand on the shoulders of people that made Utah arrays and used Utah arrays for decades before we ever even came along. Neuralink arose partly this approach to technology arose out of a need recognized after Utah arrays would fail routinely because the rigid electrodes, those spikes that are literally hammered using an air hammer into the brain, those spikes generate a bad immune response that encapsulates the electrode spikes in scar tissue, essentially. And so one of the projects that was being worked on in the Anderson lab at Caltech when I got there was to see if you could use chemotherapy to prevent the formation of scar. It's like, things are pretty bad when you're jamming a bed of nails into the brain and then treating that with chemotherapy to try to prevent scar tissue. It's like, maybe we've gotten off track here, guys. Maybe there's a fundamental redesign necessary. And so Neuralink's approach of using highly flexible, tiny electrodes avoids a lot of the bleeding, avoids a lot of the immune response that ends up happening when rigid electrodes are pounded into the brain. And so what we see is our electrode longevity and functionality and the health of the brain tissue immediately surrounding the electrode is excellent. I mean, it goes on for years now in our animal models.
What do most people not understand about the biology of the brain? We mentioned the vasculature. That's really interesting.
I think the most interesting, maybe underappreciated fact is that it really does control almost everything. I mean, I don't know, for an out of the blue example, imagine you want a lever on fertility. You want to be able to turn fertility on and off. I mean, there are legitimate targets in the brain itself to modulate fertility. Say, blood pressure. You want to modulate blood pressure. There are legitimate targets in the brain for doing that. Things that aren't immediately obvious as brain problems are potentially solvable in the brain. And so I think it's an underexplored area for primary treatments of all the things that bother people.
That's a really fascinating way to look at it. Like, there's a lot of conditions we might think have nothing to do with the brain, but they might just be symptoms of something that actually started in the brain. The actual source of the problem, the primary source is something in the brain.
Yeah, not always. I mean, kidney disease is real, but there are levers you can pull in the brain that affect all of these systems.
There's knobs.
Yeah.
On-off switches and knobs in the brain, from which this all originates. Yeah. Would you have a Neuralink chip implanted in your brain?
Sure.
Yeah. I think use case right now is use a mouse, right? I can already do that. And so there's no value proposition. On safety grounds alone, sure, I would do it tomorrow.
You say the use case of the mouse. Is it after researching all this and part of it is just watching Nolan have so much fun? If you can get that bits per second really high with the mouse, being able to interact, because if you think about the way on the smartphone, the way you swipe, that was transformational.
Yeah.
How we interact with the thing. It's subtle. You don't realize it, but to be able to touch a phone and to scroll with your finger, that changed everything. People were sure you need a keyboard to type. And there's a lot of HCI aspects to that changed how we interact with computers. So there could be a certain rate of speed with a mouse that would change everything.
Yeah.
It's you might be able to just click around a screen extremely fast. And that, I can see myself getting a Neuralink for much more rapid interaction with digital devices.
Yeah, I think recording speech intentions from the brain might change things as well. The value proposition for the average person. A keyboard is a pretty clunky human interface. Requires a lot of training. It's highly variable in the maximum performance that the average person can achieve. I think taking that out of the equation and just having a natural, word to computer interface might change things for a lot of people.
It'd be hilarious if that is the reason people do it. Even if you have speech to text that's extremely accurate, it currently isn't.
Right.
But say it gotten super accurate, it'd be hilarious if people went for Neuralink just so you avoid the embarrassing aspect of speaking, looking like a douchebag speaking to your phone in public, which is a real that's a real constraint.
Yeah, I mean, with a bone conducting case that can be an invisible headphone, say, and the ability to think words into software and have it respond to you, that starts to sound sort of like embedded superintelligence. If you can silently ask for the Wikipedia article on any subject and have it read to you without any observable change happening in the outside world. For one thing, standardized testing is obsolete.
Yeah. If it's done well on the UX side, it could change. I don't know if it transforms society, but it really can create a kind of shift in the way we interact with digital devices in the way that a smartphone did. Now, I would, just having to look into the safety of everything involved, I would totally try it. So it doesn't have to go to some like incredible thing where it connects to your vision or to some other, like it connects all over your brain. That could be like just connecting to the hand knob. You might have a lot of interesting human-computer interaction possibilities.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and the technology on the academic side is progressing at light speed here. I think there was a really amazing paper out of UC Davis, Sergei Stavitsky's lab, that basically made an initial solve of speech decode. It was something like 125,000 words that they were getting with, very high accuracy, which is...
So you're just thinking the word?
Yeah.
Thinking the word and you're able to get it.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Like you have to have the intention of speaking it.
Right.
So like do that inner voice. Man, it's so amazing to me that you can do the intention to signal mapping. All you have to do is just imagine yourself doing it. And if you get the feedback that it actually worked, you can get really good at that. Like your brain will first of all adjust, and you develop it like any other skill.
Yeah.
Like touch typing, you develop it in that same kind of way. To me, it's just really fascinating.
Yeah.
To be able to even to play with that. Honestly, like I would get a Neuralink just to be able to play with that. Just to play with the capacity, the capability of my mind to learn this skill. It's like learning the skill of typing or learning the skill of moving a mouse. It's another skill of moving the mouse, not with my physical body, but with my mind.
I can't wait to see what people do with it. I feel like we're cavemen right now. We're like banging rocks with a stick and thinking that we're making music. At some point, when these are more widespread, there's going to be the equivalent of a piano that someone can make art with their brain in a way that we didn't even anticipate. I'm looking forward to it.
Give it to like a teenager. Like anytime I think I'm good at something, I'll always go to like, I don't know, even with the bits per second of playing a video game. You realize you give it to a teenager, you give a Neuralink to a teenager, just a large number of them, the kind of stuff, they get good at stuff. They're going to get like hundreds of bits per second.
Yeah.
Even just with the current technology.
Probably.
Just because it's also addicting how the number go up aspect of it, of like improving and training, because it's almost like a skill. And plus there's the software on the other end that adapts to you. And especially if the adapting procedure, the algorithm becomes better and better and better, you like learning together.
Yeah, we're scratching the surface on that right now. There's so much more to do.
So on the complete other side of it, you have an RFID chip implanted in you.
Yeah.
So I hear.
Yeah.
Nice. So this is
a subtle thing.
It's a passive device that you use for unlocking like a safe with top secrets, or what do you use it for? What's the story behind it?
I'm not the first one. There's this whole community of weirdo biohackers that have done this stuff, and I think one of the early use cases was storing, private crypto wallet keys and whatever. I dabbled in that a bit and had some fun with it.
You have some Bitcoin implanted in your body somewhere, you can't tell where.
Yeah, actually, yeah. It was the modern day equivalent of finding change in the sofa cushions. After I put some orphan crypto on there that I thought was worthless and forgot about it for a few years, went back and found that some community of people loved it and had propped up the value of it, and so it had gone up 50-fold.
Wow.
So there was a lot of change in those cushions.
That's hilarious.
But the primary use case is mostly as a tech demonstrator. It has my business card on it. You can scan that in by touching it to your phone. It opens the front door to my house, whatever, simple stuff.
But it's a cool step. It's a cool leap to implant something in your body. I mean, it's a similar leap to a Neuralink, because for a lot of people, that kind of notion of putting something inside your body, something electronic inside a biological system, is a big leap.
Yeah, we have a kind of a mysticism around the barrier of our skin. We're completely fine with knee replacements, hip replacements, dental implants. But there's a mysticism still around the inviolable barrier that the skull represents. And I think that needs to be treated like any other pragmatic barrier. The question isn't how incredible is it to open the skull? The question is, what benefit can we provide?
So from all the surgeries you've done, from everything you understand the brain, how much does neuroplasticity come into play? How adaptable is the brain? For example, just even in the case of healing from surgery or adapting to the post-surgery situation.
The answer that is sad for me and other people of my demographic is that, the plasticity decreases with age, healing decreases with age. Yeah. I have too much gray hair to be optimistic about that.
Từ từ. Cái gì đây?
Knee replacements, hip
Hơi bị phân tâm tí. Sorry.
people have done this stuff, and I think one of the early use cases was storing, private crypto wallet keys and whatever.
Dạo này
Storing,
tự dưng mình không hiểu này.
Bits per second.
yeah,
Rồi.
Even just with the current technology.
probably.
Just because it's also addicting how the number go up aspect of it, of like improving and training, because it's almost like a skill. And plus there's the software on the other end that adapts to you. And especially if the adapting procedure, the algorithm becomes better and better and better, you like learning
Trời,
together.
muốn mưa quá.
We're scratching the surface on that right now. There's so much more to do.
So on the complete other side of it, you have an RFID chip
Yeah.
implanted in you.
Yeah.
So I hear.
Yeah.
Nice. So this
Little-
is
little subtle thing.
It's a passive device that you use for unlocking like a safe with top secrets, or what do you use it for? What's the story behind it?
I'm not the first one. There's there's this whole community of weirdo biohackers that have done this stuff, and I think one of the early use cases was storing, private crypto wallet keys and whatever. I dabbled in that a bit and had some fun with it.
Ai đáp thật là thử vọc
You have some Bitcoin implanted in your body somewhere, you can't tell where. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah. It was the modern day equivalent of finding change in the sofa cushions. After I put some orphan crypto on there that I thought was worthless and forgot about it for a few years, went back and found that some community of people loved it and had propped up the value of it, and so it had gone up 50-fold. So there was a lot of change in those cushions.
That's hilarious.
But the primary use case is mostly as a tech demonstrator.
Tech demonstrator, thử nghiệm à? Người biểu tình.
It has my business card on it. You can scan that in by touching it to your phone. It opens the front door to my house.
Yeah.
Whatever, simple stuff.
RFID à? RFID chip. Oh.
But it's a cool step. It's a cool leap to implant something in your body. I mean, it's a similar leap to a Neuralink, because for a lot of people, that kind of notion of putting something inside your body, something electronic inside a biological system, is a big leap.
Yeah, we have a kind of a mysticism around the barrier of our skin. We're completely fine with knee replacements, hip replacements, dental implants. But there's a mysticism still around the inviolable barrier that the skull represents. And I think that needs to be treated like any other pragmatic barrier. The question isn't how incredible is it to open the skull. The question is, what benefit can we provide?
So from all the surgeries you've done, from everything you understand the brain, how much does neuroplasticity come into play? How adaptable is the brain? For example, just even in the case of healing from surgery or adapting to the post-surgery situation.
The answer that is sad for me and other people of my demographic is that, the plasticity decreases with age, healing decreases with age. Yeah. I have too much gray hair to be optimistic about that. There are theoretical ways to increase plasticity using electrical stimulation. Nothing that is, totally proven out as a robust enough mechanism to offer widely to people. But I think there's cause for optimism that we might find something useful in terms of, say, an implanted electrode that improves learning. Certainly there's been some really amazing work recently from Nicholas Schiff, Jonathan Baker, and others who have a cohort of patients with moderate traumatic brain injury who have had electrodes placed in the deep nucleus in the brain called the central-median nucleus, or just near central-median nucleus. And when they apply small amounts of electricity to that part of the brain, it's almost like electronic caffeine. They're able to improve people's attention and focus. They're able to improve how well people can perform a task. I think in one case, someone who was unable to work after the device was turned on, they were able to get a job. And that's sort of, one of the holy grails for me with Neuralink and other technologies like this is, from a purely utilitarian standpoint, can we can we make people able to take care of themselves and their families economically again? Can we make it so someone who's fully dependent and even maybe requires a lot of caregiver resources, can we put them in a position to be fully independent, taking care of themselves, giving back to their communities? I think that's a very compelling proposition, and what motivates a lot of what I do and what a lot of the people at Neuralink are working for.
It's just a cool possibility that if you put a Neuralink in there, that the brain adapts, like the other part of the brain adapts too.
Yeah.
And integrates it. The capacity of the brain to do that is really interesting. Probably unknown to the degree to which you can do that. But you're now connecting an external thing to it, especially once it's doing stimulation. Like the biological brain and the electronic brain outside of it working together, like the possibilities there are really interesting.
Yeah.
It's still unknown, but interesting. It feels like the brain is really good at adapting to whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, it is a system that by itself is already, like everything serves a purpose. And so you don't want to mess with it too much.
Yeah. It's like, eliminating a species from an ecology. You don't know what the delicate interconnections and dependencies are. The brain is certainly a delicate, complex beast, and we don't know, every potential downstream consequence of a single change that we make.
Do you see yourself doing, so you mentioned P1 surgeries of P2, P3, P4, P5, just more and more and more humans?
I think, it's a certain kind of brittleness or a failure on the company's side if we need me to do all the surgeries. I think something that I would very much like to work towards is a process that is so simple and so robust on the surgery side that literally anyone could do it. We want to get away from requiring intense expertise or intense experience to have this successfully done, and make it as simple and translatable as possible. I mean, I would love it if every neurosurgeon on the planet had no problem doing this. I think we're probably far from a regulatory environment that would allow people that aren't neurosurgeons to do this, but not impossible.
All right, I'll sign up for that. Did
Not
you ever
impossible.
anthropomorphize the robot R1? Like, do you give it a name? Do you see it as like a friend that's like working together with you,
I mean, to a certain degree,
or an enemy who's going to take your job?
it's a complex relationship.
All the good relationships are.
It's funny, when in the middle of the surgery, there's a part of it where I stand basically shoulder to shoulder with the robot. And so, if you're in the room reading the body language, it's my brother in arms there. We're working together on the same problem. I'm not threatened by it.
Keep telling yourself that. Yeah,
Keep telling yourself that.
how have all the surgeries that you've done over the years, the people you've helped, and the stakes, the high stakes that you've mentioned, how has that changed your understanding of life and death?
Yeah. It gives you a very visceral sense, and this may sound trite, but it gives you a very visceral sense that death is inevitable. On one hand, you are, as a neurosurgeon, you're deeply involved in these like just hard to fathom tragedies. Young parents dying, leaving, a 4-year-old behind, say. And on the other hand, it takes the sting out of it a bit, because you see how just mind-numbingly universal death is. There's zero chance that I'm going to avoid it. I know, techno-optimists right now and longevity buffs right now would disagree on that 0.000% estimate. But I don't see any chance that our generation is going to avoid it. Entropy is a powerful force, and we are very ornate, delicate, brittle DNA machines that aren't up to the cosmic ray bombardment that we're subjected to. So on the one hand, every human that has ever lived died or will die. On the other hand, it's just one of the hardest things to imagine inflicting on anyone that you love is having them gone. I mean, I'm sure you've had friends that aren't living anymore, and it's hard to even think about them. And so I wish I had arrived at the point of nirvana where, death doesn't have a sting. I'm not worried about it, but I can at least say that I'm comfortable with the certainty of it, if not having found out how to take the tragedy out of it. When I think about, my kids, either not having me or me not having them, or my wife.
Maybe I've come to accept the intellectual certainty of it, but and maybe the pain that comes with losing the people you love. I don't think I've come to understand the existential aspect of it, like that this is going to end. And I don't mean like in some trite way. I mean, like, it certainly feels like it's not going to end. Like, you live life like it's not going to end.
Right.
And the fact that this light that's shining, this consciousness is going to no longer be in one moment, maybe today. It's like, it fills me when I really am able to load all that in with Ernest Becker's terror. Like, it's a real fear. I think people aren't always honest with how terrifying it is.
Yeah.
I think the more you are able to really think through it, the more terrifying it is. It's not such a simple thing. Oh, well, that's the way life is. And if you really can load that in, it's hard. But I think that's why the Stoics did it, because it like helps you get your shit together and be like, the moment, every single moment you're alive is just beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying that it's going to end. And it's like, almost like you're shivering in the cold, a child, helpless, this kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And then it makes you, when you have warmth, when you have the safety, when you have the love, to really appreciate it. I feel like sometimes in your position, when you mentioned armor, just to see death, it might make you not be able to see that, the finiteness of life, because if you kept looking at that, it might break you. So it's good to know that you're kind of still struggling with that. There's the neurosurgeon, and then there's a human.
Yeah.
And the human is still able to struggle with that and feel the fear of that and the pain of that.
Yeah, it definitely makes you ask the question of how many of these can you see, and not say, I can't do this anymore. But I mean, you said it well. I think it gives you an opportunity to just appreciate that you're alive today. And I've got 3 kids and an amazing wife, and I'm really happy. Things are good. I get to help on a project that I think matters. I think it moves us forward. I'm a very lucky person.
It's the early steps of a potentially gigantic leap for humanity. It's a really interesting one. And it's cool because like you read about all this stuff in history where it's like the early days. I've been reading, before going to the Amazon, I would read about explorers that would go and explore even the Amazon jungle for the first time. It's just, those are the early steps.
Yeah.
Or early steps into space, early steps in any discipline, in physics and mathematics. And it's cool because this is like on the grand scale, these are the early steps into delving deep into the human brain. So not just observing the brain, but be able to interact with the human brain.
Yeah.
It's going to help a lot of people, but it also might help us understand what the hell's going on in there.
Yeah. I think ultimately we want to give people more levers that they can pull, right? Like, you want to give people options. If you can give someone a dial that they can turn on how happy they are, I think that makes people really uncomfortable. But now talk about major depressive disorder, talk about people that are committing suicide at an alarming rate in this country, and try to justify that queasiness in that light of you can give people a knob to take away suicidal ideation, suicidal intention. I would give them that knob. I don't know how you justify not doing that.
Yeah, you can think about like all
that knob.
Knobs.
I don't
Neuralink.
know how you justify not doing that.
Yeah, you can think about like all the suffering that's going on in the world. Like every single human being that's suffering right now, it's like it'll be a glowing red dot. The more suffering, the more it's glowing, and you just see the map of human suffering. And any technology that allows you to dim that light of suffering on a grand scale is pretty exciting. Because there's a lot of people suffering, and most of them suffer quietly. Yeah. And we we look away too often, and we should remember those that are suffering, because once again, most of them are suffering quietly.
Well, and on a grander scale, the fabric of society. People have a lot of complaints about how our social fabric is working or not working, how our politics is working or not working. Those things are made of neurochemistry too, in aggregate, right? Like our politics is composed of individuals with human brains, and the way it works or doesn't work is potentially tunable, in the sense that, I don't know, say remove our addictive behaviors or tune our addictive behaviors for social media, or our addiction to outrage, our addiction to sharing the most angry political tweet we can find. I don't think that leads to a functional society. And if you had options for people to moderate that maladaptive behavior, there could be huge benefits to society. Maybe we could all work together a little more harmoniously toward useful ends.
There's a sweet spot, like you mentioned. You don't want to completely remove all the dark sides of human nature, because those kind of are somehow necessary to make the whole thing work. But there's a sweet spot.
Yeah, I agree. You gotta suffer a little, just not so much that you lose hope.
Yeah. When all the surgeries you've done, have you seen consciousness in there ever? Was there like a glowing light?
You know, I have this sense that I never found it, never removed it. You know, like a Dementor in Harry Potter. I have this sense that consciousness is a lot less magical than our instincts want to claim it is. It seems to me like a useful analog for thinking about what consciousness is in the brain. Is that we have a really good intuitive understanding of what it means to, say, touch your skin and know what's being touched. I think consciousness is just that level of sensory mapping applied to the thought processes in the brain itself. So what I'm saying is, consciousness is the sensation of some part of your brain being active. So you feel it working. You feel the part of your brain that thinks of red things or winged creatures or the taste of coffee. You feel those parts of your brain being active the way that I'm feeling my palm being touched, right? And that sensory system that feels the brain working is consciousness.
That's so brilliant. It's the same way, it's the sensation of touch when you're touching a thing. Consciousness is the sensation of you feeling your brain working, your brain thinking, your brain perceiving.
Which isn't like a warping of space-time or some quantum field effect, right? It's nothing magical. People always want to ascribe to consciousness something truly different. And there's this awesome long history of people looking at whatever the latest discovery in physics is to explain consciousness, because it's the most magical, the most out there thing that you can think of. And people always, want to do that with consciousness. I don't think that's necessary. It's just a very useful and gratifying way of feeling your brain work.
And as we said, it's one heck of a brain.
Yeah.
Everything we see around us, everything we love, everything that's beautiful came from brains like these.
It's all electrical activity happening inside your skull.
And I, for one, am grateful that there's people like you that are exploring all the ways that it works and all the ways it can be made better.
Thanks,
Matthew, thank you so much for talking today.
It's been a joy.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Matthew.
It's been a joy.
McDougall. And now, dear friend.
Ok. Rồi. Thôi, sáng nay mình live bên đây thôi. Có thể là bây giờ là còn 3 tiếng rưỡi. 3 tiếng rưỡi về 3 tiếng rưỡi, nhưng mà chia 2 buổi thì cũng hơi nhiều nha. Có thể mình chia 3 buổi thì có thể là hôm nay, chiều nay hoặc là tối nay 1 tiếng, xong ngày mai nốt nữa. Rồi, hẹn gặp lại nhé. Bye bye. Trời mới nóng nè. Trời nó nắng mà như kiểu hồi tháng 4 ấy. Nhưng mà mình thì do gió kiểu hồi tháng 4, tháng 5 ở Sài Gòn lúc nào cũng là cái khoảng thời gian nóng nhất, đúng không? Thì mấy hôm nay tương nó nóng, ban ngày nó nắng như thế, nhưng ban đêm vẫn mát. Thì đó, mấy tháng kiểu sau mấy tháng là tự dưng mình quên, xong bây giờ mình nhớ lại cái cảm giác mà bị nóng hồi tháng 4, tháng 5 ấy. Bye bye.